clearing close in the forest you'll find a fabulous banquet, a fairy ball. If you close your eyes and you open your mind, the veil disappears and you'll see it all.
Hi my angels, it's Hailey Reese, and today I am really excited to share a personal story from my life of something that happened to me that has to be one of the scariest times of my life, and kind of give you guys an insight as to why I'm so appreciative of life day to day, and just share the time that I literally almost died. So many of you guys have been telling me that you've been missing on my channel some personal stories of things that I've endured. And so I thought, why not share this story, because it's something very real that I went through, non-paranormal, and something that I think people can relate to. I mean, like, even if your lung hasn't collapsed, we all experience times in our lives where health issues can hold us back. And so I wanted to share the story of the time that my lung collapsed, that I was hospitalized for nearly 2 months, that I was in and out of the hospital for about a year, and that initial hospitalization leading to needing to remove half of my left lung. So if you guys want to hear this story, all you gotta do is just keep on watching today's video. A very quick disclaimer that I would like to just say is, for those of you who have weak stomachs and may be worried that I'm gonna insert some gory pictures, don't worry, I will absolutely not do that to you. There's one chest tube that I'm going to show at the end of the video, but there will be fair warning, and that will just be for those like medical junkies who are interested to see the chest tube that I did have. But don't worry, no pop-up medical gore. You're set for the video. This coming January and February will be 3 years ago that this took place. And 3 years ago, I was actually living in LA at the time because I was making music, and I was about to release an album. So I was living out in LA, but that January I was going to be turning 19. My birthday is January 30th, 1996, and here in Toronto, Canada, when you hit the big 19, you are legal drinking age. So I had decided that I was actually going to fly back from LA to Toronto to celebrate my birthday here in Canada with my boyfriend and my friends, and to be able to have some legal drinks. I mean, why not? I dreamt of this since I was little. The States can't deprive me of that. So about a week before my birthday, I fly back to Toronto, Canada, and I'm out here and everything seems completely normal. Now, my birthday actually fell on a Friday, which everybody prays to the birthday gods when they turn legal drinking age that they can have a weekend birthday. And I got one, which was so awesome. And my boyfriend had decided he was going to surprise me for this weekend. So he wound up getting a hotel room in Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada, that was conjoined to another room that had his best friend and his best friend's girlfriend, who turned out to be one of my best friends. And we were all just gonna like go to dinner and have some drinks and party and whatever else. So that was like a very sweet surprise. So we get to the hotel room, the surprise happens, I'm all excited, and the boys go to the LCBO, which is the Ontario Liquor Store, and I'm in the room with Genevieve. And all of a sudden, you guys, you know, we're just going about having this amazing girl time, we're just talking, we're getting ready, we're getting all glamorized, and all of a sudden I get the worst pain right here in my upper shoulder blade. Like, when I explain this pain, I don't even think I can. It's like a Charlie horse mixed with like someone stabbing a knife in your back, and there's like no way you can move, nothing you can do to make this pain better. So I tell Genevieve, I'm like, oh my goodness, I just got the worst pain in my back. I'm freaking out, I'm trying to like stretch it out. And she thinks what I think, and that's that it's a pulled muscle. So I'm stretching it out, I'm on the floor, I'm rolling out my back, I'm trying to make it better. The boys come back, I'm telling them, I'm like, it hurts so bad. Everyone thinks it's a pulled muscle. So we just go about our night. Now, one thing I should mention is that ever since I was a little girl, I have had very, very bad lungs. I've suffered from asthma since I was little. I've been on every single lung medication and steroid you could possibly think of. Ventolin, Advair, Singulair, Flovent, prednisone, which is a steroid, and everything under the sun. If there is an antibiotic to help your lungs in any situation, your girl's been on it. And I wish I was being dramatic, but that's the truth. And one of the bad things about me to this day is that I don't go a day without taking my Ventolin, which is a rescue inhaler, which is like, people go months without taking them, and I take it almost every day. But I see a lung specialist for that, so don't worry. So the whole reason I'm mentioning this is because my lung could have been giving me signs up until this point, but I probably just thought it was my asthma, and Didn't think anything of it. So nothing is out of the ordinary for me other than this sharp pain in my back that everyone thinks is back pain. So we go, well, obviously it's back pain, that everyone thinks is a pulled muscle. So the night goes on, everything's great. Later that night, I'm literally crying because it hurts so bad. We go back to the room, we call it a night, and the next day that back pain is still there, but I still think it's a pulled muscle. Now the next day after that day, so now we're looking at Sunday, the pain had actually subsided. So I was feeling a lot better. And that whole week goes by and I'm feeling a lot better. It's just like a little ache now at this point, and I think, oh, it's getting better. The following Sunday, so now it's been like a week and 2 days since, the initial pain happened. My hairstylist offers to take my boyfriend and I out to sushi and a movie for my birthday. So he's out in the car and I realize I forgot something inside. So I run inside, and we're in her car, by the way. I run inside to get it, and as I go to leave and I'm running back out the door, I just remember going, and getting the worst pain in my back again. But now it's not just in my back, it's in my chest and it's down my arm, and it feels like what people describe a heart attack, but worse. And so now I'm like, oh my gosh, they're waiting in the car. What am I gonna do? I get into the car and I tell them, I'm like, I think I'm having a heart attack. And they obviously laugh at me because, well, they didn't laugh at me, but they're like, Hailey, come on, you're not having a heart attack. Like, it's your pulled muscle again. Just like breathe through it. They're like, my hairstylist was telling me, I've had really bad pulled muscles where it feels like I can't breathe. Like, don't worry. So we get to sushi. The pain does not feel better. I text my mom and I'm like, Mom, this is what I feel. And she goes, Hailey, I'm at your sister's ringette game, but you need to go to a hospital because this does not sound normal. So I finally say, hey guys, do you mind to take me to the hospital? Of course they didn't mind. So we get to the hospital. Now the one problem with being Canadian and having free healthcare is that our hospital wait times are outrageous. Like, because it's free healthcare and because you can go to the ER and leave and never be charged for it, we just paid in taxes, people will sometimes use the emergency room as like an after-hour doctor clinic. So there's people in the ER, not everybody, but there's people in the ER who really don't need to be there. So our wait times can average between like 8 to 13 hours just to wait to get a bed in the emergency department. You're just sitting in the open space. So we get there and the wait time is 9 hours, because when you go in it says like average wait time. Now obviously if you're a priority you get pushed up, but typically you get thrown into that category unless you're like dying, right? So they see the wait time and they have like a little mini heart attack and they're like, do you mind if we run to Tim Hortons? We'll get us all coffees, you get situated, get registered at triage, and then we'll come meet up with you. I'm like, of course. So I get into triage, which is where they evaluate you to kind of put you on the level of severity. And I get in there and they put the thing to measure my oxygen on my finger, and my oxygen's like pretty good. Like, it looks really good. And I'm like, oh no, I just came in here for nothing. We're gonna wait 12 hours to hear I pulled a muscle. Like, Hailey, come on. And I remember there was 2 nurses. There was one sitting at like the desk typing, and then there was one that was like putting the blood pressure monitor on and all that stuff. And I remember the one nurse sitting there told the nurse behind me, listen to her back. So she starts listening to my back, and I will never forget this moment, you guys. She looks at the nurse and goes, massive decrease in the left side. And the nurse says some medical term back, and she goes, we need a doctor now. So the one nurse is on the phone with the doctor. The other nurse is grabbing me a wheelchair to rush me to x-ray. And I'm texting my mom and I'm telling her, and she's like, I'm on my way now. So my mom rushes there. I'm alone. My boyfriend and my hairstylist are at Tim Hortons getting coffees because I think we're waiting 10 hours. Little do they know I'm being rushed straight to x-ray, which is unheard of. Like, not unheard of because obviously they do it in severe situations, but typically you wait in the waiting room, they call you in, you see a doctor, the doctor orders the x-ray, and then, it's a process. Nope, straight there. They rush me back into a room right next to like the doctor and nurse's stand where they could watch me, and they hook me up to all these heart monitors. I'll picture it here. And at this point I'm like, I'm having a heart attack. This is it. And so the really nice nurse that had been like taking me place to place, I said to her, listen, I suffer from severe anxiety and I need to know what could be possibly going on. And my mom's with me at this point. And she says, listen, I can't give any diagnoses. I can't tell you anything other than the fact that we're investigating to see if perhaps, worst case scenario, your lung has collapsed. For the first time in my life, you guys, I thought to myself, when is it ever worst case scenario? Like, clearly it's not going to be. But boy, was I wrong. Shortly after that, the doctor comes into my room. My mom and boyfriend are with me. And he says, your lung is less than 50% visible. It has collapsed. and we're going to perform surgery right here in the ER. Well, I'd never had stitches. At this point, I'd never had a broken bone. I hadn't had any sort of like medical, like surgery or anything like that. So I started to cry. They hooked me up to an IV. They gave me all these drugs that make me all loopy. They flip me on my side, they cut me open, and they insert a tube while I'm wide awake, just like drugged up, into my lung. Now, this is the picture right here. They sent me home with this tube. They basically explained that in order for this tube to work, there's a little flap at the bottom that needs to wiggle, and that means that the excess air that's pushed into your chest while your lung is collapsing can be removed and your lung can therefore inflate. He explains that only 2% of the time this fails. I'll be fine, don't worry about it. He books me a specialist appointment in 2 days. Okay. That night, my boyfriend stays with me because I'm all loopy and drugged up, and he had heard about the flap. He notices while I'm sleeping that the flap isn't working and my breathing doesn't sound right. So he moves my arm in ways to make the flap flap. Make the flap flap. So the next day I wake up and I can't stand up straight. I'm in the worst pain of my life. I cannot breathe. So I go back to the ER. Turns out my chest tube was put in improperly, and they now have to put a new chest tube in because now my lung is like just barely visible. So it's getting bad. So they flip me on my side. This time they don't have time to wait for the painkillers to really kick in. They cut me again. I felt everything. I felt my rib cage moving. I felt the grinding of the tool. It was awful. And they sent me home with that chest tube again because my specialist appointment is now the next day. So I go home, same thing. My chest tube is working, but it's not working. And so the next day I wake up, and at this point I can't move. I can't even sit up straight. No way that I move is comfortable. I can't even cry because I can't even breathe enough to cry. And my mom goes, we're not going back to that hospital, we're going to the specialist. So we get in the car, and I remember every speed bump I would scream. Like, this pain is unimaginable, you guys, like unimaginable. We get to the specialist, and I tell her that I think this chest tube isn't working and I think my lung's worse. And she explains the same thing the initial doctor did, that only 2% of the time it doesn't work, and come on, you're fine, it's a rough process. Okay. She goes and does an x-ray, she brings the x-ray into the room, she looks at the x-ray, she looks at me, she looks at it again, and she goes, you see your lung there? And I said, no. She goes, me either. You're admitted on lung support, and we need to get you on suction immediately. So now I'm admitted to the hospital. They put a suction tube onto my current tube, which is basically hooking me up to a machine that's going to suck all of the air out of my chest 24/7. When they put this on, you guys, I experienced what I can only imagine taking your last breath feels like, because it sucks all of the air out of your chest for a good minute, and it takes your body a minute to recuperate. So for a minute I'm like, and I couldn't breathe at all. So finally I'm on this lung support, and the nurses explain that my lungs should inflate by the morning. Now I'm on a respiratory floor in a respiratory unit that specializes in lungs, collapsing. There are elderly women around me that every morning when I wake up, they've gone because their lungs reinflated. Mine would not. Mine would not even inflate enough to be visible. This went on for 3 weeks until finally I was put on an emergency surgery list, which basically means that people who have scheduled surgeries now have to be moved below me because I'm considered critical. My dad was on a cruise ship. I remember I heard my mom out in the hallway talking to the doctor while they thought I was sleeping. And I heard the doctor tell my mom that he doesn't know if I can pull through this because my lung is collapsing onto my trachea, which is collapsing onto like my heart and other lung. I was in pretty rough conditions. I was taking 2 Percocets every 4 hours and Dilaudid every hour, and the pain never subsided. It just became bearable and tolerable. So the day of my surgery comes, and I remember being wheeled down to the OR and thinking to myself that that could be the last time that I ever saw my mom, and that my poor dad is out in the middle of the ocean getting like really broken up phone call updates from us. And I just, it was the most humbling moment of my life to think that this could be it. And I remember I wheeled in, and funny note, the surgeon's like, I need to mark which side it is so that they know, whatever. And he marked my right hand, and it was my left side, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm trusting this guy to perform my surgery. He doesn't even know right from left. But I wake up from the surgery, and I remember looking down and seeing this tube that I thought was coming from my stomach, but it was actually just taped there, and it was filled with blood. and I was just terrified. The pain was just unbelievable, and the nausea and everything. But I was supposed to stay in the ICU that night, and I was so coherent that I wound up getting to stay in my own room, which was pretty cool. Now, basically what they had to do for my surgery is awful. They went in through 3 little incisions and a camera. So I have 3 incision scars, but back in the day I would have had 1 giant scar. And when they went in and took a look at my lungs, they realized that I was just born with really bad lungs, and they were covered in blisters and scarring, and that I didn't have good lungs at all. So they had to scrape off all of the blistering and the scarring. They wound up having to remove half of my lung to kind of give me a smaller but more clean functioning lung. They put some sort of powder, it's medical powder, glued it to my rib cage, so to speak, and stapled it. So basically every time I inhale, my lung is forced to inflate with my rib cage, if that makes any sense. And I guess they saw that my other lung had the same blistering and scarring because I was just born with it. I'm not a smoker. And they told me that there's a 60% chance that in this lifetime that lung will collapse as well. So a week later, they go to remove my tube, and this is a whole other story as to this awful nurse, but I had a big giant chest tube, which I'll show you guys at the end for those of you who want to see it. And this nurse was just rude and stubborn and wound up really messing me up because she refused to stitch it, and I wound up with a big giant hole in my side. When I finally did get sent home, I had an at-home nurse for a month. She wasn't with me 24/7, but she was there every day. And I ended up getting pneumonia and having to come back for stitches because I had a big gaping hole in my side that every time I coughed or sneezed or moved, liquid was spewing out of. That's a whole other story, but my recovery was extremely rocky, and I was constantly afraid that I wasn't being receptive to the surgery because I had asked the doctor, what happens now? And he said there's only a 2% chance that this left lung will ever collapse again, but if it did, I'd have to be on a transplant list because you cannot perform this same surgery twice, especially with the minimal lung I had left. So that year was rocky. I now see a lung specialist. I can never skydive. I can never scuba dive. Anything with like dramatic change in pressure is just never gonna be okay for me. I'm on a lot of different steroids and antibiotics for my lungs, but you know what? I'm here, I'm alive, I'm kicking it, I can breathe, and I feel like I am very fortunate given the trauma that my body went through in that time to be here. I tried to condense this story as easily as possible. My recovery was nothing shy of awful. I had record contracts that I had to walk away from, and I had to leave business ventures that I had built in that time for my music career because I couldn't live in LA because I couldn't fly on a plane for 6 months, and even once I could, I was terrified because of the pressure change. The first time I flew on a plane, you guys, I was in tears because I was so afraid of this happening again. I was so afraid. The first time I went on a roller coaster, I called my lung specialist. I said, hey, can I go on a roller coaster? He's like, Hailey, no pressure change from a roller coaster is enough to collapse a lung. And I was just so afraid for the longest time. But I'm finally at a place, you guys, approaching the 3-year mark that I'm no longer afraid. I've just learned that my lungs are my downfall in health and life, and I have to be very careful, and I try to keep my cardio up as much as possible to try to make sure that I can keep my lungs healthy and strong and okay. That's basically the condensed version of this story, you guys. I tried to fit in as many of the main details as I could while trying to keep it under 30 minutes. I went through a really hard time, and it was one of the most humbling experiences because I realized how from one day I could go from being a healthy 18-year-old girl to the next day being an extremely sick 19-year-old girl whose life was right flashing before my eyes. I remember people came to visit me every day, and one time when I was in the hospital, the nurse kicked everyone out because I was trying to keep my spirits high. I was sitting up, I was talking, even though it hurt. I thought that if I gave in to the illness, then I might as well be dead. So I was fighting to keep my lung going and to be okay. And I remember the nurse kicked everyone out, and she sat down on my bed and she said, you can't be this energetic. You can't be this outgoing. You're a very sick little girl whose life is on the line. And I remember I said to her, but if I act like a very sick little girl whose life is on the line, then I might as well have let it win. And I think that that's what kept me alive in the times where I had like moments where it was really bad, you guys, like where there were moments where my family didn't know if it was going to be my last day. Like this wasn't just a normal spontaneous pneumothorax. This was beyond that, and it was extremely terrifying. So yeah, so what I experienced is called spontaneous pneumothorax, which basically means a spontaneous collapsing of the lung. Nobody can give me an answer as to why this happened to me. Apparently it happens more commonly to tall, slender men. But there's really no telling. I mean, some people will argue that it could have been the prednisone and the steroids in my body so young that scarred my lungs. Some doctors say that I was just born this way. And some people think that it's just something that happened to me. I've been to different specialists and tried to ask them, and nobody knows. But all I know is I was born with bad lungs and this happened. So for those of you who don't want to see the size of my chest tube and don't want to see any sort of medical photo of it, this is where I'm going to say goodbye to you because I'm about to show those who are interested. I love you guys so much, and for those of you who do want to see my chest tube, this was the final chest tube that was removed and no stitches were put in place, right here. So yeah, it wasn't fun. It was a very trying time. It was trying of my faith. It was trying of my health. But you know what, you guys? I didn't. And I came through and I'm here now. And so that's the story. You guys wanted to hear it, and there it is. If you guys enjoyed today's video but you are not yet subscribed, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. I post a ton of videos. I don't want you to miss when I upload. And please give this video a big thumbs up. It makes my heart really happy when you guys do that. So please do that. Remember, my loves, do all things with kindness. And until next time, I love you.